Welcome to another Lunch and Learn here at Domo, and I am excited. Fan favorite at this point, Andrea Henderson. We were talking earlier. She's been on here 3 times since we started doing these Lunch and Learns at Domo. These are community events that we're providing you all year long, along with some really fun stuff like Domo Palooza that's coming up in a couple weeks. You can always register by clicking the QR below, or if you've got a question and you need help and an answer soon and quickly, check out the dojo where you can join all of your peers in discussion and collaboration. The dojo is a great place for you to get that community forum experience, and as well as your questions, answers, and solutions provided immediately, which is great, which is why I'm here. I'm Eddie Small, the Domo Director of Community. I've got Andrea Henderson again with us from the Data Pipeline Architecture team and a manager here at Domo. So super excited to have her. Again, introductions need not apply since she's been here so long. We already have super fans, Andrea. Daniel here says Andrea is the best. Hashtag super fan. Woo, little heart symbol. This session's already got heat. I'm ready. Andrea is going to talk today a little bit about stuff that flies right over my head, SQL and data flow logic. But that's why she's here, to teach me and to teach all of you during this Domo Lunch and Learn. So thanks again, Andrea. Really appreciate you being a part, as always. Anyone that needs to ask a question or has a comment to make, like our good friend Daniel did there on YouTube, it's in the live chat section over to the right-hand side of your screen. Be sure to use that during this session to ask any questions or to give Andrea lots of love, because we appreciate her being here. Andrea, welcome. Thank you again. Super excited.
Thanks, Eddie. I'm excited to talk about this topic today. It is one of the most interesting and fun things, in my opinion, really diving deep on how to convert data flows from SQL to our new Magic tool. Well, I guess it's not so new, but how to convert from data flows from SQL to Magic. Let me share. Uh-oh, I'm having trouble. Okay, let's see.
Uh-oh. Yeah, you did mention, Andrea, that we'll be talking about, data flows, magic flows, all the fun stuff, in this session. I think the best part about doing these lunch and learns, which she'll talk about, is just like the little tips and tricks that you don't typically get elsewhere. And we are ready. Let's roll. Again, if you have any questions or comments, that'll be on the right-hand side. Appreciate everybody joining. Excited to see what Andrea has for us today. Thanks again,
Excellent.
Andrea.
Thanks, Eddie. Okay. So, you have watched the news before. If you've Palooza, if you've talked to me in person, you've probably heard me talk about how, for the most part, you don't really want to use SQL data flows if you can help it. For a lot of reasons, we vastly prefer, and you should vastly prefer, to use Magic data flows. On my last session, we had some questions around, well, how do I exactly convert these data flows from SQL to Magic? And so I decided to do a full session on this. First off, I want to kick it off, though, with reasons why you might want to convert your data flows from SQL to Magic. First of all, you will see massive performance improvements just about across the board. If you have a data flow that you've converted from SQL to Magic that you do not see massive performance improvements on, please email me and let me know, because I'm super curious about it. I have never seen one before. So please let me know if you end up with one of those. I'd love to see that unicorn. But so you should see massive performance improvements, to the tune, depending on how you're able to refactor it, to the tune of, like hours down to seconds or minutes. So definitely that's kind of the number one reason our customers want to move to these. It also improves the robustness of your pipeline. It provides you with more efficient pipeline patterns, making it, more error tolerant, more efficient, and more able to handle the regular day-to-day running of the pipeline. Um, Anybody who uses a lot of Redshift flows especially will know that the load times and write back times in Redshift can be wildly variable. With Magic, much less variability, much more predictability for your business. It also is much more scalable. You can handle more data through Magic than you can handle through MySQL per se. Also, we'll get to this in just a second, but you do have additional data storage abilities with Magic that you don't have with Redshift and MySQL, like using partitioning, which is in beta. And also, it's easier to maintain the pipeline for your non-technical users. So back in the olden days, I used to do analytics at eBay. I was there for 11 years doing analytics. And one of the banes of my existence was having somebody come to me, need a report, need me to create something for them. I would create it, I would turn it over to them, and then they would come back to me repeatedly with questions or enhancements or whatever. With Magic, I've seen a lot of our more technical customers be able to set up these data pipelines for their users in a way that the users can then own and maintain the pipelines themselves, freeing you up to do more interesting things than just like continual iterations on your pipeline. Like I mentioned, in Magic, you have the ability to use partitioning and subset processing are in beta. I have a whole session on that. I have gone through it ad nauseum at various points. Happy to talk to you about it one on one. But basically, this gives you a huge amount more scalability and efficiency in your pipeline. I have so many customers who just kind of like SQL, and, like, I get it. Um, I've had customers say, "I will use Magic when you price SQL for my cold dead hands." Like, I understand the fervor. I honestly feel I felt the same, right? Like, I SQL is elegant, it's very familiar, it's flexible, it's kind of universal. If you write SQL here, you can write SQL there, and you can go to any company and be, an analyst at any company. Um, However, the benefits to using it are so great that, it started to win me over. To using Magic are so great, it started to win me over. And not to like out nerd you here, but for additional SQL cred, I once literally wrote a song for my husband in which the chorus was a SQL statement. So I'm just saying, I really love SQL, but if I can move to using Magic when it makes sense, you also can move to using Magic. Okay, so let's get into it. How do I think about these things when I start converting a data flow? I've done a vast number of these throughout the years, and it's one of my favorite things to do. I think it's extremely fun, but I know it doesn't necessarily come naturally, and it does take some mental gymnastics to start thinking through how you might even begin to approach this problem. Um, I do have an actual real live example to show you in a few minutes, but let's go through this kind of academically speaking. So when I'm looking at a data flow, the first thing that I do when I'm looking at a SQL data flow is I reevaluate the data flow as a whole. I would say at least 80% of the data flows that I take to look at um, and to convert have unused inputs or they have gone through so much iteration because often if you have a SQL data flow, you're one of the old school customers. You've been here for ages, you have a whole bunch of tech debt, you have things wrapped up in SQL, and people have iterated on it throughout the years. And Steve left the company, and nobody knows where Brandon is, but he probably knows what this one piece of logic does, so we better not touch it. So, really taking a step back and going through the data as a whole can help you streamline the data flow when you're kind of porting the logic to Magic. So I always check for inputs that are no longer needed. I check to see if there are steps in the data flow that aren't used further downstream and are going through needless processing. Nothing is more frustrating than when you are recreating this logic in Magic and you're plugging along and you recreate a really complicated piece of logic and then you find out it's just not even used further downstream. There's no part of it in the output. It was pointless. You didn't need to do that. So just kind of making sure that you have a good grasp on the data flow as a whole before you start converting it. The very next thing I do is I look inside the transforms in more detail, and I figure out if there are cases in which the one of the initial input tables is being filtered first thing in a transform. Um, because it might give you the opportunity to do this filtering prior to the data flow. So with SQL data flows like Magic, or sorry, like MySQL and Redshift, you cannot have views as an input, but with Magic, you can. I have seen a design pattern in which you use a view to do your filtering up front, you use that as your input to Magic, and it reduces the amount of time that you need to run your data flow exponentially. So seeing when you have opportunities to do that top notch. That will get you a lot of gains as far as converting those data flows. Then the next thing that I do is I look at the joins that are happening between the tables. I try to identify whether they are joins between raw inputs, whether they're joins between inputs and interstitial temp tables, and basically just get a handle for how things are joining. I also check the data types of the join keys to make sure that they match because in some cases, SQL will implicitly cast your data types and Magic won't always. Magic will throw some errors. So you want to make sure have compatible join types for your keys. Um, and then at that point, after I've gone through and done that checking, depending on how complex the data flow is, sometimes I'll get out a piece of paper and just map out how I imagine my overall logical flow for the magic flow. I kind of write it out in pseudocode. I don't include every little, calculation or whatever, but I include the major joins, I include major filters, and I just try to get a good sense for how I'm going to go into the magic flow when I'm building it. It may seem like these steps are things you don't need to go through or that these are a waste of time and you just want to jump in and start recreating the data flow, transform for transform. I don't recommend it, and I really recommend putting a little bit of forethought into it because you're not necessarily just trying to copy the logic, uh, transform per transform. What you should be trying to do is refactor in a way that the whole thing is more efficient using Magic as the platform. So at that point, when you have, your idea all mapped out, I open a Magic Flow and I add all my inputs. It's kind of like an opening ceremony for me, going in, adding all the inputs I need. And then I'll either use my map as a guide to start kind of throwing in tiles and creating where I want different joins to occur and that kind of thing. Or, you can open your transforms and go transform by transform at this point, creating your logic, systematically. Either thing works. Um, so diving into the actual types of logic, I'm going to assume that you have a working knowledge of magic, um, and and that you definitely have a working knowledge of SQL. So I'm going to relate kind of the different SQL clauses to the different types of magic tiles you might be looking at to fulfill those SQL clauses. I will call out that if you're not familiar with these tiles, I would encourage you to go check out our knowledge base because they have really extensive articles that go into how to use each of these tiles. I'm not going to go through that exhaustively. I'm just more interested in talking about how these tiles map to the clauses. So the first thing that I look at is the from clause, which may seem a little bit less intuitive, although if you think about how you construct a SQL statement, you need to know what tables are going to be part of your SQL statement before you construct it. So you go to the from clause. Um, any of your joins that you're creating will need to happen in the join tile. And within this tile, a couple of things to call out. The order that your tables are in matters, so you might need to switch around which is the left table, which is the right table, and also making sure that you're selecting the join type from the dropdown. You also, as I noted before, you need your data types to match in order for the join keys to match. Here I have a little screenshot showing, the error when your data types don't match on your join keys. You can join on multiple columns. However, non-equijoins or joins that use a keyword like between in your SQL flows, those aren't really supported. You can't configure those in your join tile. There is a workaround. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but that is one thing to know. Another thing to know is that each join needs its own join data tile. So you'll need to take that into consideration when you're thinking about how to order your joins. When you're writing a SQL statement, you're usually saying like from this table, aliasing it, and then you're joining on this other table, aliasing it, etc. So in Magic, it's a little bit different to think through. You need to do the join between the first tables first, then you add in a third table and you join that third table onto the result of the first two joins, and so on throughout the process of joins that you need to make. And so you want to think about the order that you really want to make those joins when you are setting up your Magic data flow. The next thing I look at is the where clause. Now, I've probably already looked at this a little bit
Hey,
before.
Andrea. Sorry, I'm going to pop in here. We had a couple questions come in, and I want to make sure that we grab them before we move on because they're a little bit deeper dives. Our good friend Elibot, always popping into the live stream. We appreciate him watching. Thoughts on moving the join logic for raw tables to a view before the data flow?
Hmm. You can. I don't know that you're gonna get a lot of gains there. I have done it. Usually I've done it when I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to make something stick or make something work. However, it if you think about where so you're going to have to spend that time somewhere. So the time to join, if it is before your data flow, that's fine, but it'll just take longer to load in. If it's within your data flow, fine. Um, so I would normally do my joins within the data flow, but you can do them in a view if you have a reason to. I know some customers define some of their business logic and they do some basic data modeling in a view, in which case, absolutely fine, do your joins there and then bring it into Magic. But I don't know that it is a performance best practice, so to speak.
Awesome. The second comment that came in was from Mel over on YouTube. Any trick to convert joins? And then there's a function here, so you might want to jump over to your StreamYard so you can see it better. This is going to look like a million mirrors here, so
Yeah,
I'll stop the screen share so you can see it a little bit better. Any trick to converting these joins, these tables and columns in Magic?
yeah, we can talk about that in a minute. So that's kind of what I was alluding to when I said non-equi joins. In which there is a workaround for it. Basically, you create a Cartesian between the two tables, and then you filter on what is relevant, which works fine. However, can be, depending on your data sizes, can be really resource intensive. So kind of use with caution.
And I am putting some resources as well. So Jason on YouTube asks any workaround for conditional join. I'm sure you're going to
Same
demo a
thing.
lot of this
Yep.
stuff. So kind of the same thing around there. So we'll let you go back to your presentation. I'll turn the screen share back on and we'll let you continue. But thanks for jumping in and, grabbing those.
Sure. Great. Okay, so moving on to the where class. I've probably looked at this already because one of the things I'm going to do is do some filtering before I even put my tables in. However, this is the next place I look to see um, what I need to do from a filtering perspective within my data flow. Your filtering is going to happen in the filter rows. You can create multiple filter conditions in a single tile, unlike the join. And you can use a couple different things. You can either use kind of the menu-based logic to create rules, or you can write formulas. Um, and this really is where you're getting into more of an art than a science when you're trying to decide whether or not you want to filter before you join, whether you want to filter um, midstream, just depending on what your logic calls for. Um, one note is that you cannot join tables in the filter tile. Old school SQL users, I see you. I know people still put their joins in the where clause sometimes, so you cannot do that in the filter tile. Moving to select, I think about select in a couple different phases. So once I have my joins and my filtering all set up, I need to get my output data set, and that's kind of in two different steps. The first one is I create any calculations that I need to create. I basically create any columns that have been created in the select clause in my SQL statement. So there's a lot of options for this column creation. I urge you to check the Domo knowledge base for details on all the tiles that are available. One thing I do want to note is that the formula tile is a game changer. Anybody who's been around Domo a long time remembers Magic 1, in which there was no formula tile, and you had to create these massive waterfalls of filters in order to create a case statement, which felt absurd every single time. That was back when I used to refuse to use Magic. So nowadays, the filter tile, game changer. I use it for case statements. I use it for anything that I just don't want to figure out the tile logic for. It's a little bit lazy if your aim for the data flow is to make it super understandable for non-technical users. It might be better to use the tiles that expressly are for the different purposes, but you can use a formula tile for just about anything. One note is that in the formula tile, you can't do aggregations. You have to do aggregations in a group by tile, and you want to handle those last in your calculations because likely you need to be able to group by all of your other columns in order to get those aggregations put together. The second thing that I think about with the select clause is just creating that select list for which you use the select columns. I had in here a note that said this was the bane of my existence. I removed that note in case anybody sends this to the product team. Just kidding, product team, if you're listening, love you guys. But it is such a pain. Anybody who has converted SQL data flows to Magic data flows and has cases in which you have, 200 columns and you need like 125 of the columns or something. Such an epic pain, right? There's not really an easy way to just copy and paste that select list over. There used to be a way to just copy out, and this might have been just like something that they fixed, but I haven't been able to do it recently. But there used to be a way to just copy out the tile and like paste it in um, a code editor, and it would give you the JSON for it, and then you could just like go in and update the JSON and then copy it back in. I haven't been able to do it recently. I don't know if it's something that wasn't supposed to work and so they fixed it. Anyway, that used to be an option. That is not an option anymore as far as I can tell. However, you do have a couple options. You can add all the columns and just delete what's not relevant from your select list, or you can copy and paste one by one. If I'm doing a lot of columns from a large data set, to make sure that I'm not messing up, that is often what I will do. And it is tedious, but it's a necessary evil at this point. Um, One note is that when you pull a select columns into the result of having joined a bunch of things and done some logic, you will have all columns from all of your joined data sets. So you can either handle those along the way by doing little select clauses as you make joins in order to make sure that the output from the join is only the columns that you want. Like you would if you were writing a SQL statement, or you can do it all at once at the end. I tend to do it along the way just because I don't lose track. Um, and then finally, change is coming. They are creating a SQL tile. I've been told that my pet peeve of the select list will be resolved by that. So big hopes that that SQL tile will alleviate a little bit of the pain in the that we are experiencing from this. One note about that SQL tile, though, I know people are just going to take their whole SQL statement and dump it in that tile, if that's possible, if that's how it works. I would encourage you not to do that because there's a lot more that you can leverage in Magic as far as setting up your logic in a way that steps can be done kind of in tandem because Domo will stream data and will, calculate things in tandem as much as it can within the Magic flow. So leveraging that instead of just having it all sequentially makes a lot of sense. All right, so final steps. You've gone through your data flow, you have all your logic set up, you've created your output data set. I would run that alongside your current data flow for a week or so. And I would set up cards that compare aggregates of different calculation fields. I would set up row counts, things that will help you determine if the logic that you have created in Magic is indeed doing what the logic was in SQL, and you can make any tweaks to your logic. Magic is a new animal if what you're used to is writing SQL, and it is I still make mistakes where I will create a Magic data flow, I'll run it, and I'm way off somewhere, and it's because I've misunderstood how to configure a given calculation in Magic. So no shame in it, just run it alongside, make sure that you have done things how you think they or how they should be done. Also, I would put commenting into place in your Magic flow, to make your tile names more friendly, maybe even color coding to make sure that anybody who comes into your data flow understands what's happening in it. With SQL, you can, although I don't often see this, people do not follow this best practice. With SQL, you can just enter comments like right in line there throughout your SQL. But with Magic, you have to kind of go out of your way to enter the comments and to make the friendly names and things. But I urge you to do it. And then eventually, you can switch your downstream processes, switch all your cards to your new outputs, bask in your fame, fortune, and glory, because you've now refactored your data flow from 9 hours to 9 minutes, or whatever your success ends up being. So before we jump into looking at an example in the Domo interface, I do want to talk about a couple of limitations and gotchas. I'm calling this my unofficial list of frustrations, my own personal, from Office Space. Why does it say paper jam when there is no paper jam moments? Um, so we already talked about the select columns tile. That's a big one for me. The inability to do non-equa joins, I can tell that's a big one because there were 3 questions on that one thing. There is the workaround in which you cross-join the data flows and then you apply the filter logic based on whatever it is you need in your logic, whether it's between, whether it's greater than, um, or whether it's conditional, and filter back down those rows to only the ones that should have joined. Um, like I mentioned, that can create a lot of processing if it is big data sets that you're cross joining. So, not optimal, but is a fair workaround in the event that you need to be able to do that type of a join in your Magic data flow. The other notes, so there's no ability to filter on the input tile. With the subset processing beta, you can filter based on metadata about your input data set. So if your input data set is partitioned, or if you want to be able to limit your input based on when the rows were loaded to Domo, you can now do that in the subset processing beta. However, being able to filter on values that exist within your data set is a request that a lot of people have. I have that same request. It's been bubbled up to the product team. Um, but that's kind of a frustration of mine is not having the ability to do that. I had a customer bring up to me the other day a frustration with not being able to load all rows for previews. So what they were doing is in Redshift, they will just say load all of the rows for their input data sets, and it takes them a while for it to load, but then as they're going through their data flow when they preview, they can get a full idea of all their data, and they can do some validation before they even run the data flow. That's not an option in Magic, so that's an interesting limitation, and also something that would be, quite useful, I think, for a lot of people. There's a handful of functions that are difficult to account for in Magic, like list ag or group concatenation. These are things that I would not shame you for going back to SQL for. You can kind of simulate them in Magic depending upon what you need or your use case, but it is frustrating that those aren't there. And then also the ability to create some functions if you want to be able to create functions to, I don't know, loop through data or whatever you need to do that you might normally do in MySQL. Um, there's not the ability to create those same things in Magic. I mean, you could use Python tiles to create some of that if you have those as part of your setup. Um, but admittedly, those aren't available kind of in the core system. Um, One thing I would say though is there have been a lot of times in which I've gone in and looked at what a function is doing, and I've been able to recreate that um, logic not using functions in Magic. So I would still encourage you to take a look at it and see if you can figure it out, even if you pull up in a data flow and say, "Oh, there's functions. I can't do that one." I would encourage you to take a second look. So I'll pause there for just a second before I hop into the interface, just if there are any additional questions.
I don't think we have any additional questions coming in right now, Andrea, before we kind of walk into the demo. But
Sure.
if you do have questions, obviously free to throw those in the chat at any time. Oh, we did get one. Look at that. I knew it. I was fishing. We threw a line out. We snagged an L. Looks like another heavy one here. Does having multiple select tiles in the Magic ETL add more time to the total runtime versus having one select tile?
I don't think so. I think it can actually speed it up because, um, for example, if you are putting select tiles after each of your joins in order to make sure that you are only feeding through the fields that you need post join, then you are processing less data downstream in future steps because you have fewer columns.
Awesome. Thanks again, Mel. Keep them coming. You got to keep Andrea on her toes as she dives into the platform. So we'll let her do that. Thank you guys so much. Keep them coming into the questions and comments section. We'll be free to jump in as they come in.
All right. So diving into the interface, this part flows are real. They don't have any like data in them or anything, so do not be worried if you see anything that seems like, "Oh, you shouldn't be sharing that." This is just our demo instance. I went in poking around in there this morning because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, I really want to be able to show an example of how to do this." And I found this Redshift data flow that I thought might make a good example. So going into the data flow, um, when I started looking at it, the first thing that I did was, like I said, I checked to see if all of the inputs were used throughout the data flow, if there were any transforms within here that were either not used in the data flow downstream or were obsolete. And I found a couple things. The first thing I found is that this data flow, or sorry, this data set that is 438,000 rows is never used in this data flow. So theoretically, somebody brought this information into this data flow to use it and then just decided against it, but never removed it. So every time this Redshift data flow is running, it's reading in 500,000 rows it doesn't need to read in. So that's one thing I was like, okay, instantly, I'm not bringing that into my data flow. Looking further down, we see this artifact of using MySQL in which you have to create these procedures to index the columns that you're joining on in order to optimize your joins. I knew I don't need to recreate these because Magic does that inherently. Okay. And then I clicked through each of the transforms and saw, okay, fairly straightforward, pretty sequential joins upon joins, etc. Okay. And I just kind of made a plan. This is one that I didn't make a plan out on paper because it's fairly straightforward, fairly simple. But I made a plan in my mind of what I was going to do when I moved into my magic flow. So just to show you the types of joins we have here, so we just have um, a case in which we're taking a table and applying to the objects of that activity log when the most recent view was for that object. We are making a pretty simple join and filtering down to a certain number of columns. We're making another join, very straightforward. They're creating another object that indicates the deleted, and then they're joining that deleted in, and then they're spitting out their final data set. This thing takes 30 minutes to run, not too bad. Um, when I go in here to Magic, so the first thing I did was I brought in all the tables that I needed, not including this table, it's not even used. And then I decided to just pick out the columns that I needed to operate on in order to create that max event time calculation that I had here in this data flow um, to create that most recent view column. I noted that I was just selecting them there. I have noted that here in the um, group by, I was just creating the most recent view column. And then I have my first join here to the pages. One thing that is interesting with joins in Magic is that it will call out when you have um, column naming conflicts. So if you have the columns of the same name in both tables, you can choose to fix it so that tables in one or in columns in one table or the other will be automatically renamed or dropped. So looking at that when you're making the join is helpful. Um, I basically just made the series of joins here. Went back up here to create that case in which we were filtering to indicate deleted pages, join that to the end result, um, added in a column, a case statement here using the formula tile, selected out the final columns that I wanted in my data set, and then spit out the end result. And I think this thing took less than a minute to run. So, much more efficient. Admittedly, a large part of that efficiency is because we are not feeding in 500,000 rows, so we don't need to feed in. However, definitely an improvement on the old data flow. So any any questions, anything, any other topics that anybody wants to cover related to this?
Yeah, and again, if you have any questions for Andrea, put those in the live chat over to the right-hand side. or if you just want to show her some love for being a part of another live stream. The 3-timer, we should get jackets like SNL where they have like the 5-timers club. Andrea will be a part of the 5-timers club at some point. She's been on so long.
I'm in.
She loves them. And she's going to have her team on, I think, in a few weeks, which will be amazing. And then she'll be back probably end of April to give us another nugget of information. Andrea, I don't see any more questions coming through. Again, I appreciate you being a part of this Lunch and Learn, and everybody for joining. If you have any questions, obviously throw them in, or you can get a hold of us. Pretty simple. For me, eddie.small@domo.com. I'll make sure you get directed to the right place. Or, you know, the best place to find us. I'm going to make a shameless plug. Here it comes. The dojo. Obviously, you know, we want people to be involved in our community forums. That's a direct link there in the QR code. But appreciate you again, Andrea, for being a part of these live streams. We can't wait for you to join us on the next one.
No problem. One thing I did want to mention is if you are having trouble converting a data flow from SQL to Magic, this is literally like my favorite thing I do in my job. So if you want to throw your question into the dojo, if it is public facing, or if it's not, you can email me directly. I'd be happy to help you out with it. I think it's very fun. I would love to help you.
Yeah, we have so many people, I think, especially on Andrea's team and that side of the house, that just love to kind of dive in and solve those problems. I'm going to say some numbers here, and if Anna was watching, she'd probably yell at me, our manager of community. But we have an insanely quick respond time inside the dojo. So as you jump in, you know, your answers definitely can get solved in, you know, less than a few hours, and industry standard is way higher than that. So our community really dives in. Our teams here at Domo dive into just making sure to provide you a solution. Hey, we've got one. Mel, very active today. If there was a prize to be had, Mel would win it. Andrea, what tricks would you recommend to pad empty values for previous X variable numbers of rows in Magic ETL, something like a Python bfill?
Yeah, that's a rough one. I'd have to.
Look at that. She's tripping you up, Mel. Mel's tripping you up.
I know. I'd have to think. I'd need to see a little bit more around what the outcome was you were looking for. Um, we have handled things similar to that in the past. That's one of those kind of fun ones where it's like, okay, as it comes up, you know, you're noodling out the how to do it.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for you right now.
Whew. But I guarantee Andrea will be thinking about it. She'll be back on the next live stream. She'll be like, I know exactly what to do. Jason asked for the SQL tile. When should we expect it to come?
I don't know.
There's another one.
I'm not on the product team. I have heard it's coming. I'm anxiously waiting it like you are. I don't have a date.
Okay. Let's give love to Andrea. Let's stop stumping her. Let's let her get out of here and feel excited about the thing that she provided us, which was a ton of knowledge today. Andrea, thank you again. Appreciate you being a part of the live stream. Everybody joining us, thank you for being a part and engaging in the chat and comment section. Jason says, thank you so much, Andrea. We love the love coming through on that. We do these live streams every Tuesdays and Thursdays, but not this Thursday, because we are going to be running our community virtual event, which will be happening this Thursday. If you haven't registered for that, check out the dojo. It's posted there for a registration link, as well as I'll throw it into the comment section here after the stream. So if you stick around, you'll be able to find it as well. Mel, thanks, Andrea. You are awesome. I concur, Mel. I concur. Thanks, everybody, again. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.